Now I'll continue. So this was the trade before, and I was stopped out. So I took this entry. But now I'm looking again, and look what happened. It came down. I was stopped out. But now it moved back up again, moved down. This area created a lower high, or a higher low, I mean. This was a higher low. And here's a bottoming tail. So as this began to move up, I bought above that high right here. So now, here's the low. This is the area right here. Here's that higher low. And this zone right here, this is the zone that I'll be looking to. Now, if this price immediately reverses down to here, well then I'm wrong again and I'll have to get out. But what I'm looking for now is now I'm looking for this to move upwards into this area, right in here. That's the area. Now this green line, that represents my average price, $147.59. That's the average price. So now I just wait. Notice these moving averages? The price is beginning to stay above them, and they're beginning to move upwards. This moving average, I'd like to see do this. I'd like to see this go higher. And what I'd really like to see is I'd really like to see this. And I'd like to see this price move all the way up here with all the bars. And then little bars that move back down. And then come to the moving average and begin to move higher. And then the bars begin to move down. And the price begins to move higher. So now all I can do is sit and wait. But while I'm waiting, I can make use of that time. I can continue to practice. Continue to practice looking for bottoming tails. Here's another bottoming tail. Here's a bottoming tail. Here's a bottoming tail. This is kind of a bottoming tail. I'm not too specific. Here's another bottoming tail. Now I'll go through and see if I can find topping tails. Now this is important. Notice what happened. Here's this topping tail, and here's this powerful bar to the downside. It didn't move down. Notice what happened over here on this side. We had a similar bar, just like this one. Then we had another bar, and then you had this extremely powerful bar. Look at that wide range, long bar. But in this one, nothing happened. And then a topping tail, and nothing happened. Nothing happened here. So now, I'd like to see this continue upward. That'd be great. But in the meantime, I'll continue my efforts, and I'll look at the chart and try to determine what's actually happening. So I found all the bottoming tails. I found all the topping tails. What else can I look for? Well, I can look at this resistance area right in here, the area that I'm looking for it to move into, which it has. Now what's below this? Well, there's this area here. What is that called? So how do I define what these areas are? Well, if this area is what's known as major support, then this would be considered minor support. So if I draw this again, here, this whole area, if it moves back, would be minor support. Whereas this again and this, those are major support. Now notice the control of these bars. It wasn't the same as before. Before, it was just a waterfall. Just began and then boom, all the way down. Now let me take a look at bars that opened and closed at the high. I'll see how many of those I could find. Here's one. That's going up. It opened and closed at the high. Here was another one. Look at this. Another one that opened and closed at the high. Now if I take a look at what's actually happening with those bars, I can see that this bar here was opened, closed at the high, but when it tried to come back into this bar, you could only make it a third of the way. And then it moved even higher. And then if I look at this bar, I say what happened. There were a series of smaller bars, including this bottoming tail, that also moved back throughout this bar, multiple bars within the big bar, and then did it again. It put in another bar that was pretty powerful. Look at this one. It opened and closed at the high. That's pretty powerful. And then it tried to reverse, but nothing happened. Now if I look at the entire move, let's look at this entire move right here. And if I fill this in, so if this was one big bar, how much of this bar did it retrace? Not much. Maybe a third. And then what happened? It began to move up again. That's pretty powerful. So I begin to stack these all together and try to look at not only the individual parts, but all of the parts put together. And now if I look at this move, this also could be put together as one big bar, a big red bar. But what happened? So let's try that. Looking at this bar as one big red bar. That's the big red bar down. It moved up, higher, higher, and higher. It wiped out the entire bar. That's pretty powerful. So that's a complete reversal. So if I were to look at this, now before I go down there, look at that. It made it above that high. That was my area. That's terrific. And then look at the moving averages. Here are the moving averages beginning to turn up. I'd like to see this, followed by some bars that do this, then go higher. That'd be great. So now, if I look at this was the big red bar to the downside. And then this entire move right here, that did the following. So if this was the red bar, that move down that represents this bar, and this bar, this entire move wiped it out. So that's pretty powerful. Now, one could see this on a higher time frame. So I'm still looking at this. Right now it's forming a topping tail. But it doesn't move the same way that this one did. It's still moving, but it's moving higher. And here come the moving averages. They're beginning to catch up. So in this instance, I just have to step back. I have to step back and let it continue. There's really nothing for me to do. I should plan ahead though and say, well, what happens if this begins to just make a massive move to the downside? Well, at this point, I should probably set everything to, if the price comes down to my green line, I should probably get out. However, if the price comes down to around here, and then another bar is formed to the upside, well, I could add. So I could add more. Now what that'll do is that would bring up my average price. So if I added some here, the average price would probably move into this area. So for now, I just sit and wait. Now this was a pretty powerful bar to the downside, but I keep watching and noticing this tail. This could possibly be a bottoming tail. So I have to keep watching. There's a little while left in the bar, but it's important to let the bar continue. Let these bars finish. So if this bar can finish up here, that'll be a bottoming tail. Oh, look, it did. Pretty close. So if this is a bottoming tail, that's a pretty positive sign. It looks like this will continue to move up. And here come the moving averages. This is where it gets exciting. Now in the meantime, I can continue practicing what I see. So if I look off here, I look at these topping tails, those were almost surpassed. But what needs to happen is the price needs to move above it, then it needs to come back down and hold it, and then move higher. Right now, it's struggling right at these tails. Now this is what's known as major resistance. If it can get through that major resistance and then come back down again, well then it becomes support. But it would be minor support. So I'll draw this box and then continue to watch to see if it can make it above it and hold above it. So it traded to it, but it didn't trade to it and hold. It needs to trade to it, through it, and hold. So this bar needs to close above this level right here. That's the important part. Needs to get above that high. So these little bars that are being formed, that's positive. Remember what happened over here to the left. We had these multiple bars coming up. It formed a topping tail. Then it formed this down bar. And then it made a lower high. That's pretty different than what's happening right now. Right now, it went higher. It created the bottoming tail, but it also formed a higher low. So that's something I can practice too. I'll have to make a note. If I see the stock make a high, and I've entered, and it can't get above that high, and it breaks below this low, well, I should probably get out. Maybe if I didn't wait as long, I wouldn't have had a full stop. Maybe it would have only been a quarter of a loss. But these are all things that I'll have to practice over time. It'll never just be one specific trade. I'll have to try to do this over multiple trades. So that's another thing I could look into. I could write that down as well. How many trades do I need to do in order to be able to practice something and then implement it? So if anybody has any suggestions, please write them in the comments. Meanwhile, this is still moving. It's pretty slow, but it's still moving. And this is a good experience because now I'll be able to see what it's actually like in this trade as it begins to move. And I think the experience of being in the trade and watching it move at different speeds and variations is equally as important. So it's still holding here. This is powerful. If I look at this close of the bottoming tail, it hasn't changed. It hasn't even broken below it. So let's see what else can I practice. Well, I can begin to look at these moving averages. They're beginning to move up. I can look at how many bars do I need for major support. Well, here's 1 bar, 2 bar, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 bars. So I could make a rule that says if I have more than 10 bars, that could be considered major support if it makes it into those lows. Now up here, this is resistance, but this area, question is, how can I define that? Well, I think I could define it as, if I were to say it's more than 8, well, that's not really more than 8. So the 10 bar rule probably won't work. So maybe it's as price moves into these areas, whether it's long or it's short. So as it moves into these areas here, that's major support. Same thing here. Or actually, this is major resistance. In here, this would be major support. So as it moves into those areas of the lows and the highs, that's major. And then what about when it makes it above them and it comes back again, the tops of them, well, that could be minor. Oh, I think that's pretty good. So I could come up with some new terms. Now, these terms do exist. I'm pretty sure this is called major support. I'm not sure if this is called minor. I thought it may be. But I'll have to check. But these are important. Now I have terminology, things that I can actually write down and have a meaning. As opposed to just saying, well, if I look over here and this is some movement or some areas or another word, for me, it's not specific enough. All right, so now it moved above that, and it's doing pretty well. My goodness. So I'm at a point now where I'll start thinking about starting to remove some profits and reducing the risk. Now, if I were to take a look at this, this area, and this area, now this area was disaster zone. And this area was better watch out. But if I take the whole thing and I move this up to roughly the current price, the distance between here and here is about the same as the distance from here to here. So I could define some more rules. And the rule is, if I was risking this much here, well, that could be one risk unit or 1R. So now it's moved up. So now I'm definitely at break even. No matter what happens, I won't lose. Because if this moves back down close to this green line, I'll exit. And I'll exit a little above so that it pays for the commission. Now, sometimes these don't always work out as nicely as this one has, as we saw before, with this one that stopped out. So, the one that stopped out, I've currently made back everything I lost, and then some. So as these begin to move higher, I'll look to sell into other areas, which we can't see right now. It's off to the left. But there are some other areas coming up that are some more major resistance. As I begin to move into those areas of major resistance, I'll begin to take some risk off. Now, if this moves back down into here, well then, that'll be positive, because this little bar moved down like so, followed by a move back up. That's a good sign. And if it moves down into here, well, that's minor support. And that's very powerful. Then I'll look for it to even go higher. So when things begin to work, it's slow. And I'd prefer to see things moving a little slower, as they are right now. Movements like this, they can happen quickly. And if you're on the right side, that's great. But it can be difficult. Moves like this, they're challenging. These little moves, these are just steady moves. Steady increases, followed by little pullbacks, and then steady increases again. And it just continues to move higher. And it'll come back that moving average. Sometimes if I draw the moving average like this, it's a little more helpful. I can kind of project where I think it's going to go. And then if this price were to immediately drop and that bar were to close below that moving average, well, then I would have to exit. So I can use these moving averages to trail the current position I'm in. But they need time, and they need time to produce. They have to catch up to the price, and then they can be trailed. But remember, when this was first entered, it was here, on this bar. And remember what the moving averages looked like? They were still flat. And this is where it can get tricky. So continuing to watch this, looking this come up into this area here. And when it comes up there, then I'll begin to reduce the risk. Take some off. But notice those moving averages. And notice the size of these bars. So these are all the things that I begin to take note of. So, see, nothing's happening like this. That's positive. Nothing's happening like this. All of these bars are small. But here is another bottoming tail. And here is a topping tail. And that could be good practice. Determining all these different types of bars. Here's a narrow bar. It's a narrow range bar. So while I wait when things are calm and moving slowly, that's good practice. So if this turns around and closes below that line, well, that would be the time to exit. In the meantime, here's another narrow range bar. This here, this could be a setup. I'll have to wait for this bar to finish. The current bar. But that could be another setup. Look at this. As it begins to move higher. Now the other things I'll take note of is the price. Notice the price, $147.95. Another area of resistance, it could be that whole number. So at 148. When this gets closer to 148, there could be resistance there. But it's still moving pretty slowly. So now I notice these things. This moving average and this moving average and the distance between the two. As these moving averages begin to separate, that's something to take into consideration as well. Now that red line, there we go. So I took some off to reduce the risk. And this is another setup. And this here was more resistance. Notice where I placed the entry, or the exit. I placed the exits here, taking risk off as it moves into those highs, as it moves into the resistance. Now if I look at these pivots, these higher lows, there is a higher low. Here's another higher low. And here's another higher low. So that's 1, that's 2, and that's 3. At that point, I'll exit the position.